and mine. Jenny here live this Sunday with Laura.
Election week 3 and many manifestos. Labour's promised wealth and no more political panto. Sunak says he will cut tax, claiming Labour would raise it. But it's Nigel Farage who's tried to burst through this week, taunting the Tories. Most of the party's official plans have been piling up as the manifestos have emerged. But we have two party leaders joining us this week, the Lib Dems' Ed Davey and Iorwerth from Plaid Cymru. But with us in the studio for Labour, the man who wants to be the Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, and the Conservatives Transport Secretary, Mark Harper. Now, Wes, last time you were here, we asked if you remembered the party's 6 steps.
Deliver economic stability, cut NHS waiting lists, switch on Great British Energy, establish our secure border command, crack down on antisocial behaviour and train 6,500 teachers. Are my demons now exercised? Can I now be forgiven?
Oh, well, I don't know. That's for our viewers to decide, isn't it?
It's for Keir to decide, I think. He's still not got over it.
Oh, well, in election fairness, I must, Mark, ask if you can do either, I don't know, a slogan perfectly or your 5 pledges quickly.
No pressure.
Well, I think the most useful thing is to do the one that Wes forgot, which is Labour's 18 taxes that they're going to raise to close their £38.5 billion black hole and the ones they haven't ruled out.
Well, let's talk about your black hole. Liz Truss on steroids. That's what your manifesto.
OK, well, here we go. Well, here we go exactly this week. John Curtis will be with us to give us his 60 seconds on Sunday on those all-important polls.
Standing at just 20%, Conservative support is now at its lowest ever in British polling history.
Remember this, why do politicians always want to show us how much they love the beautiful game? And forget 90 minutes, our team at the table for the next 75 minutes, Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester, former Conservative Cabinet Minister Nadine Dorries, and actor and supporter of Scottish independence, Brian Cox. Morning. We've got a lot to talk about this morning. So we have 75 minutes, a slightly longer programme as the election really gets into the hot phase. So settle down, grab a coffee, and let's start, as we always do, with what is making the news. Most of the headlines put the first glimpse of the Princess of Wales on the paper front pages. There she is, at the glory of yesterday's Trooping the Colour. The Prime Minister has told the Sunday Times that his faith is getting him through this tricky campaign. But his old friend on the front of the Sunday Telegraph, Robert Jenrick, says he shares some of voters' frustrations with the Conservatives, but says a vote for Nigel Farage is a vote for a Labour dictatorship. And finally, The Observer features a warning that both the Tories and the Labour plans for the NHS would leave it strapped for cash. Well, let's start with that. Now, Andy, you were Health Secretary once upon a time, and you were one of the politicians who tried to change the social care system, which we know has really been struggling. Our viewers get in touch with us about it all the time. Are you disappointed that there isn't a huge, big plan for social care reform in the Labour manifesto?
No, I'm encouraged by the Labour manifesto. I also think it's good that Ed Davey has been talking about care in this campaign. Something has to change. We can't go on like this. I've got family experience of this at the moment. The situation where care workers are coming into the home in the morning, and if something's slightly wrong, they just ring 999. You know, if you have a social care system like that, in the end, it will collapse the NHS, because you know the pressure it's putting on the NHS is huge. I had a plan for social care in 2010.
14 years ago.
Sadly, the Tories sabotaged it with scaremongering, but before Nadine comes straight back in, so did Theresa May in 2017. And
so did Boris Johnson in 2019.
Was scaremonger about it, and that can't be defended. What I would say now is, you know, Wes has got a plan for a national care service, which is what I was talking about all those years ago. I think it's got to be a different plan now because circumstances have changed. But I would say if there is to be a Labour government, I would ask everybody in the new Parliament to get behind that plan to fix social care, because you can't put the NHS back on its feet without fixing social care.
OK, we're going to talk about that quite a lot this morning because it is something that is sort of missing, really, from the big parties' manifestos. We haven't heard from the SNP yet Brian, but what have you picked out from the other big manifesto launches this week?
Same old, same old.
Really?
I think, yeah, that's what I feel. I feel that we're not progressing in the way that we should progress, and we're being a little over canny about certain things. I do agree with Andy about the social care situation. I think we have to really attend to that big time. But there's just so much which is very difficult to choose out who's who, really, I find. I mean, my feeling is just we need to get rid of the present government. That's the most important thing as far as I'm concerned. And I think at the moment that it's a very, I don't know, I just wish I could be clearer about what's going on, and I'm not.
What do you mean by that, though?
I'm not getting a sense of what's what and who's who. I'm getting a sense of who's against and who's, you know, but I'm not getting enough of where we're supposed to be going, particularly in relationship to poverty, particularly in relationship to the care of the working class. And I feel the working class have systematically been sidestepped for a very, very long time.
So what Keir Starmer's put forward has not impressed you?
It has impressed me to a certain extent, but my main thing is that we get rid of this government. That's the most important thing as far as I'm concerned.
Now, Nadine, your party is struggling. You have been rude about Rishi Sunak on lots of occasions, but many of your colleagues who are knocking on doors around the country at the moment tell me that the rot set in under Boris Johnson and then got worse under Liz Truss, and they can't turn that round. Now, you back Boris Johnson and you back Liz Truss. Do you feel some responsibility for how difficult it is for your colleagues around the country?
Well, first of all, I'd say I'd be more factual than rude. I always try not to be rude, so I'd be more factual about the fact that Rishi Sunak is losing the Conservative Party its huge majority. And what I find, and you know, I think I'm probably on the doorstep because you have a full-time job here, slightly more than you are at the moment, is that what people are very angry about is that when Conservative MPs, or when any MPs, decide to remove the elected choice of the people without a general election. I mean, let's face it, we've had 2 prime ministers who've not been elected by the people in the Conservative Party. They will get very angry about that, and they are. And it's not so much that they're in love with Labour or Labour's policies. They're just very angry with the Conservative Party and what it did, A, in removing Boris Johnson, which was the choice of the people, and then in removing Liz Truss and never having a general election. People aren't in love with Labour, but they're very angry with the Tories.
OK, well, let's crack on with our interviews then. We've got lots to get through with today, and we'll have plenty with you later. And of course, we want to know what is on your mind as well, especially during this campaign period. As ever, you can email us, kuenssberg@bbc.co.uk. If you're a social media kind of person, you can use the hashtag #BBCLauraK. And there's always, as ever, lots and lots unfolding on the website as we go through the programme. Let's then get on with our first interview. Wes Streeting, welcome to you this morning. You've passed your first test. Let's see how you get on with our questions. We've talked a lot to you and your party in recent weeks about your promises for extra appointments in the NHS. So today we want to concentrate on things that we haven't heard answers on yet. We've just been talking to Andy Byrne about social care. Now, we've looked through the documents you published this week. There's nothing in there about raising any extra resource, any extra cash for social care, even though you yourself vowed to grip the immediate crisis. And I'm quoting you there from 2023. Why haven't you put forward a big, bold offer on such an urgent problem?
So in terms of the first steps we'll take to grip the crisis, there's a few elements there. Firstly, crucially on workforce, to make sure we can recruit and retain the care workforce that we need. We're going to negotiate Britain's first ever fair pay agreement for social care workers. Learning from our experience of introducing the first national minimum wage, we will bring together the employers, the trade unions, local government and national government to negotiate the future for pay and career progression for the care workforce. We're going to make sure we've got consistent national standards in every part of the country. And on funding, I make no bones about the fact that whether it's social care or a range of other things, of course my ambition is to go further, but we're dealing with a really difficult set of circumstances, both in terms of the public finances, but also in terms of family finances. And we've got to get onto this issue of not just the additional funding that's needed, and I don't dispute that, but also about how you spend the money that's going in well. Because, for example, in St Mary's in Paddington the other day, there was a patient in there who was waiting 60 days, fit enough to leave, stuck in an NHS bed, costing thousands of pounds every day. That money would be better spent through social care, as they've done in Leeds, where, you know, pooling, and this is this part of our manifesto, pooling budgets with NHS and social care to give better care for people and better value for taxpayers' money. That's surely got to be the first starting point.
But I want to be really clear, there is no immediate reform of the social care system in a big way, and there is no immediate extra resource for the social care system in your manifesto. That is clear, and that's one of the reasons why we want to.
We're dealing with delayed discharges, I'd say, is reform and would free up vital resource. But I'd take the challenge that Andy set forward there too about the long-term change that's needed. And this is one of those issues where I don't mind saying, even in the middle of a general election campaign, there is plenty of blame to go around. Labour's got a lot to answer for, the Conservatives, the Liberal Democrats and the SNP in Scotland, where they said they'd introduce a national care service, but that was branding rather than substance. There's plenty of blame to go around. Well, I want to have a different politics on social care, and I absolutely accept the challenge that Andy set out there, which is to, after the election, try and get people together, crucially the people who use care, whether disabled people in their families or older people in their families, but also to build a different type of politics. So the plan we set out can survive changes of government, changes of personalities and changes of colour.
Let's hear from one of them. So our viewers clearly want you to get on with this. They don't want there to be more talking shops about social care reform. There have been plenty of those. There's been the Dilnot Commission. There have been all sorts of attempts to get people together over the years. But this is about what you would do if you win. Here's a question from Ian Fisher, one of our viewers from Southampton.
My mother-in-law has been in the care home for 7 years this July. To date, she has spent £430,000, at £7,000 a month currently. She is receiving very good care. But I wonder if you think it's fair that all her money, down to £23,250, should be spent without any help from the government or council.
Is that fair?
No, and one of the things that we've committed to is, you know, obviously the cap on care costs is due to come in. I've wanted to give the system the certainty this side of the election of knowing we're not planning to come in and upend that and scrap that.
So, to be clear with viewers, you would stick to the plan that the government has set out, that not until October 2025 people would be allowed to keep their own savings or their own resources up until a limit of £100,000.
Yeah, and I've met with Andrew Dilnot. I think, you know, what he set out is a framework that can also be adjusted to make it fair and more progressive when resources allow. But that is something that's already there. I'm not interested in tearing things down until we've got something better to put in its place. What I'm absolutely committed to is building a national care service over the course of a decade, bringing people together from across the political divide to make sure that, as with the broad consensus, obviously different governments have got different records and, you know, let's not understate that. Broadly speaking, on the NHS, on how we fund our public services, you know, we might have different policies from election to election. We've certainly got different track records on the NHS, but there is a broad consensus. That's what I want to build on social care. We've all got a lot to answer for in terms of the failure on social care. I think the way in which we can redeem ourselves is to work together with a different type of politics, because, you know, there are good ideas across different parties.
Hang on, Wes Streeting. So in the heat of an election campaign, of course, politicians are chucking mud at each other. They're chucking criticisms and claims and counterclaims at each other. Are you saying today that it is Labour policy to have some kind of independent commission on social care to try to fix this, some kind of royal commission? What are you saying?
Well, I want to actually get the parties around the table and say, look, let's do this together. Let's think about how we do this. And let's make sure that we don't let families down as successive governments have. Okay, and you know, you say about slinging mud in this election campaign, and the difference is, of course, elections are about choices, and it's important to bring the choice out. But I also agree with what Andy was saying about Ed Davey. I mean, you know, I must say I was a little bit envious when he was at Thorpe Park the other day, but the best thing he's done in the entire election campaign was that really powerful video about his experiences of care.
And we're talking to him in the
Lib Dems have got some good ideas, other parties have got good ideas. Let's try and work together beyond the heat of the election campaign to see if we can do something that has escaped and eluded every single government, whether it's had a Labour complexion, a Conservative, Lib Dem or SNP complexion.
But you've just said the Lib Dems have good ideas on this. Why then does Labour not yet have developed good ideas on this? And the problem, I think, for some of our viewers is that we're always very pleased to have you here in the studio. You've sat in that seat on many occasions over the last 18 months and said, I promise I'll come back with a plan for social care. We're going to announce it. I'll come back with it. You've said that many times. And yet when we get to the point of the manifesto, the truth is it seems that you have put it in the too difficult for now box. You're talking about reform over 10 years if you are lucky enough to win this time, and then you're looking ahead to trying to win a second time. You're still offering people a vague, we'll talk about it, we'll maybe fix it in the long term. That's maybe not good enough for families like Ian or people watching this morning who've heard you, Wes Streeting, say, I'm going to fix this.
Well, two things. Firstly, I think in being honest with people, that building a national care service is work that's a decade in the making. That's honest, and that's where the credibility comes from. Secondly, if we were, for example, to introduce our fair pay agreement, that will be transformational in terms of our ability to recruit and retain the workforce, putting money directly into the pockets of people who, by and large, are working class women in parts of the country where we've had a low pay economy. That would make an enormous difference.
Well, how much will it cost then?
But just to finish this point, Laura, I make no bones about the fact, of course, on social care, I would have wanted the manifesto to be more ambitious. But to get policies in the manifesto, you had to run the gauntlet of answering two fundamental questions. Can we keep this promise? Can the country afford this promise? And if the answer to either of those questions was no, it's not in the manifesto. And that is why when people pick up Labour's manifesto as they're deciding how to vote, they should know that they can trust every single policy in there that would offer real change for our country. And of course, once we get the economy growing, which is the central starting point of a Labour government if we win the next general election, we will have more available to either invest in our public services or put back into people's pockets. Because if the economy had grown under this government at the same rate it grew under the last Labour government, there would be tens of billions of pounds available to either invest in our public services or to put back in people's pockets with tax cuts.
And that is what you hope will happen if you win, but there is nothing certain about growth. And of course, the last Labour government didn't have to deal with a pandemic and an energy shock. But let's stick on pay.
Or this trust and the catastrophic mini-budget, and they're going to do it all over again with their manifesto.
Let's stick on pay, though. So you've raised pay. Your fair pay deal is what you're promising for care workers. The Lib Dems say that care workers should be paid at least £2 above the minimum wage. What do you think is the minimum that a care worker should be paid per hour?
Well, I think we've got to negotiate that, as we did when we introduced the first ever national minimum wage. That's how Labour will approach this. And not just the minimum pay, by the way. I want care to be regarded as and respected as a profession. Because when I spent time with those care workers, as they're so often called, I see care professionals doing a really tough, really vital work that I think should be regarded as a profession. So I want to make sure there's real career progression in social care so that we can get staff across the NHS and social care working together.
And you've made that point about standards, but if you win, you'll be the Health Secretary in a couple of weeks' time if Labour wins the election. And I think people might hear you say, well, I want to negotiate, I want to sit down. Actually, people want to know what you think. There's a job being advertised for a live-in care assistant at a care home in your constituency. And the pay advertised is £94 a day. Is that fair?
No, I don't think it is. And that's why we've put fair pay agreements in our manifesto. This would be the very first. We've never done this before in our country. That tells you the priority we attach to this. And, you know, to give people the reassurance as well, you know, who will be ultimately responsible for this if Labour wins the general election? You've got a Health and Social Care Secretary who's come from a working class background, who knows exactly what poverty pay means and the consequences of it, sat next to a Deputy Prime Minister in Angela Rayner, who herself has come through the social care profession. Who do you trust more to understand and recognise and reward the vital work that care workers do? Myself and Angela Rayner or Rishi Sunak, the most out-of-touch Prime Minister we've had in modern history.
But you can explain and highlight your backstory, but you won't tell people how much you think care workers should be paid.
It's got to be, like with the minimum wage law, it's got to be a negotiated settlement, it's got to be sustainable, and we've got to do better over time. That's how real change comes about, not with the kind of unfunded gimmicks we've seen in this Conservative election campaign, which could see people's mortgages go up by £4,800 because we've got the mini budget on steroid with tens of billions of pounds of unfunded commitments. That's not change you can believe in. That's no change at all.
We'll be talking to the Conservatives in a couple of minutes' time. If you're a Health Secretary in a couple of weeks, how would you deal with the junior doctors? They're due to go on strike for 5 days before the election. What do you say to them?
I've said today in an interview with The Sun on Sunday, and I've spoken directly to the BMA too, I want them to call off these strikes that are planned during the general election campaign. Let's be honest, this government is not going to resolve the strikes before polling day. All that will happen if these strikes take place is patients are going to suffer more delayed, cancelled operations and appointments, and junior doctors are going to lose money from their pockets that I know they need because the cost of living is difficult. So I'm saying hold off. Give change a chance. If there's a Labour government on the 5th of July, one of my first calls will be to the junior doctors' representatives, and I'll be asking the department straight away to initiate the urgent resumption of talks so we can negotiate an end to these strikes once and for all.
But this all comes down to cash, and the Nuffield Trust, which is a highly respected think tank, has said today that neither your plans nor the Conservatives are essentially enough for what the NHS needs, and they've calculated that the NHS would be more strapped for cash, even though the total's gone up, but they'd be more strapped for cash than during the austerity years. Well, Keir Starmer says there won't be a return to austerity, but the Nuffield Trust says actually you are offering austerity in the health service. That doesn't add up.
I think what the Nuffield Trust have got wrong, and I have a huge amount of respect for them, is a manifesto is not a spending review. A manifesto is not 5 years' worth of budgets. A manifesto, in our case, is a fully costed, fully funded set of promises that we can keep and the country can afford. And the £2 billion that's in our manifesto pays for 40,000 more appointments every week, double the number of scanners, mental health support in every primary and secondary school in the country, 8,500 mental health workers to cut the waiting list, community mental health hubs in every community, 700,000 urgent NHS dentistry appointments, and I could go on. Every one of those promises, fully costed, fully funded, every one of them real change, every one of them a foundation for the recovery of our national health service.
But Wes Streeting, that's very interesting there, and I think that's significant. You've just said the manifesto is a starting point. Now that means there could be significant extra spending in future years and potentially significantly more tax rises to pay for the things that you want to do.
No, the number one priority of a Labour government is to get growth back into our economy. And as for, I wish I could, look in terms of where we are now compared to 1997, where things were bad then, but they are catastrophically worse now. What we can't do now is what the last Labour government did, is say to people, right, penny on national insurance to fund the NHS. Why? Because working people have been absolutely clobbered by the Tories, and even though they want more NHS investment and more police on their streets and more teachers in their schools, they are feeling pain at the moment as families. They're cancelling family holidays. They are worried about how they're going to afford their rents, their mortgages, their bills. They are worried about their future. So we've made fairer choices, closing down on tax avoidance, closing the remaining non-dom loopholes which the Tories have left in for their mates, a real windfall tax on big oil and gas giants. Those are fairer choices to fund our promises, but we've got to get back to growth.
And what about council tax? Would you rule out putting up council tax or revaluing the system? Because for social care, that's one of the income streams that councils absolutely rely on. But would you rule out
a couple of things? Look, we don't want to see the tax burden on working people increase. I know the Conservatives have baked into their plans council tax rises. That's in the government's spending forecast. What Rachel Reeves is going to work to do is to get growth back into our economy so we can invest in our public services and ease the tax burden on people.
Would you rule out increasing or allowing councils to increase council tax still further?
Look, we are anxious about the burden of taxation on working people. That's why we've ruled out income tax, national insurance and VAT rises.
I'm asking you a different question about council tax. As you said, the current spending plan set out by the Conservatives assume a certain rise in council tax over time. But would you rule out increasing that even further? And would you rule out a revaluation of the council tax system that many people actually think is long overdue?
Well, I know the Conservatives have baked into their plans inflation-busting increases in council tax, rises in fuel duty and other taxes that will hit working people. It's our ambition to get our country back to growth so that we can invest in our public services without clobbering people with higher taxes. Every promise in our manifesto is a promise we can keep and the country can afford, and none of those pledges in our manifesto requires increases in council tax or increases in fuel duty or any of the other number of taxes the Tories are claiming we want to increase. But you should ask Mark Harper, because they haven't ruled out any of those tax increases either. And it's time to scrutinise the Tories, because if there's a nightmare on Downing Street on the 5th of July, they will do what Liz Truss did on steroids, because we've got this manifesto of tens of billions of pounds
you've just
of
reminded
unfunded
us, it
spending
is indeed
increases.
time to talk to Mark Harper, because our time with you is up. It's always good to have you in the studio. Thank you for being with us, and also for us having a discussion about social care, which we know lots of you at home care about very much. Thank you, Wes Streeting. Quite rightly. Thank you, Wes. Now, how is it all being digested by you at home and by the public in all of those important polls? One poll suggested last week that Nigel Farage's Reform Party had nipped ahead of the Tories. But what is the overall picture? That's the important bit. Here's John Curtis, 60 Seconds on Sunday.
One poll this week stole the headlines. A YouGov poll that put Reform 1 point ahead of the Conservatives. But no other poll reported the same finding, though every poll has reported a fall in Conservative support and nearly all a narrowing of the Conservative lead over Reform. So what last week was an average 8-point Conservative lead over Reform has now halved to just 4 points. And standing at just 20%, Conservative support is now at its lowest ever in British polling history. Mr Sunak, whose own personal ratings have clearly fallen, must be beginning to doubt his decision to call the election early. Not that Labour have had it their own way. Like the Conservatives, their support is also down by 2 points. Labour are being challenged by the Greens, still on 6%, and the Liberal Democrats, whose vote, up in every poll this week, now stands at 12%.
OK, well, grisly hearing for Mark Harper from the Conservatives. You're one of the people fighting to turn around that picture where so stubbornly the Conservatives have been behind. You announced billions of pounds worth of tax cuts in your manifesto on Tuesday, but it's not shifting anything. Why do you think that's happening?
Well, look, a couple of things. I thought your interview there with Wes was very instructive, actually. I think he's let the cat out of the bag a bit about Labour's plans. He confirmed both on your show and on one he did earlier that their manifesto actually wasn't the whole story. It wasn't actually a programme for government. It was a document to get them through the election campaign. And he's confirmed that there are more spending promises to come. And that can mean only one thing. It means more taxes. It means exactly what we've been saying all the way through.
Well, it's not in fact what he said. What he said is that after a campaign, we would hope, if we win, to then have a spending review in future budgets. And nobody would say that the Conservative manifesto from 2019 is something that you then stuck to strictly once you actually made it to number 10. But we've done our interview with Labour about their promises, and we want to talk about your plans.
And a war in Ukraine.
Yep,
two things were huge. So, you know.
But I want to talk about your plans. You've made your point about Labour. But let's talk about your plans. There was a Conservative manifesto on Tuesday that, in another era, announcing billions of pounds of tax cuts, could have electrified the campaign. It could have suddenly changed things, and nothing seems to be shifting. Why do you think that is?
Well, look, first thing I think is worth saying is, apart from a small number of early postal votes, no one's actually voted in this election yet. I know it's been framed by the opinion polls, but I think it's worth not taking voters for granted. We are out campaigning for every vote across the country. So I think that is worth saying. Yes, we've set out a manifesto which was fully costed and fully funded. We've set out a range of tax cuts for people, so national insurance cuts for further national insurance cuts for working people. We've said we'll increase the personal allowance for pensioners so that no pensioner has to pay tax on the basic state pension. Under Labour, for the first time ever, there'll be a retirement tax where you'd have to pay tax on the basic state pension.
As we pointed out to viewers last week, actually you are suggesting cancelling something that you had brought into government. So again, I want to focus on what you are saying.
Yeah. So we'll make sure pensioners don't pay tax on the basic state pension. So there's a very clear offer there for people, a very clear choice for people at the election. And elections are about choices, which is tax cuts under the Conservatives or tax rises under Labour. And as I said, I think Wes just confirmed to you, and he did it on a programme earlier this morning, that there's spending that they're not talking about, and he's confirmed their manifesto is a document to get them through an election campaign.
What's interesting about your offer, which you are quite legitimately, as all politicians do, trying to sell to our viewers this morning. What's interesting about your offer is when you talk to candidates around the country, or you look at some of the material that's arriving on people's doorsteps or they're seeing on their social media, and we can show our viewers a flavour of some of what's happening now. Some of your candidates seem to be doing almost everything they can not to associate themselves with the national brand. Now, one of them even ended up posing with Nigel Farage rather than using a picture of them alongside Rishi Sunak. Do you think they're embarrassed by the national Tory brand?
No, I don't. I think we've got a very strong offer to set out. I think we've got a strong record. I think we've got a very clear choice before people. And look, the election is about choices, and it's very clear. If you're somebody who voted for us in 2019 and you want lower taxes and you want to control migration, if you vote for anybody else other than the Conservatives, you're going to get a Labour government with a large majority and a blank cheque, and it will literally do the opposite of what you want.
But that's a very interesting point, and you raise it.
You asked where's a question there about.
there.
Well, you asked where's a question there about taxes and about would he rule out council tax rises. And this isn't speculation by us. In Wales, where there is a Labour government, has been one for 25 years, it is literally currently legislating to revalue council tax and increase council tax
let me
bands,
remind people
and he wouldn't
let me
rule that
remind
out.
people what's happened to their council tax since you've been in charge since 2010. Since 2010, people are paying 51% more in cash terms on their council tax. So I think to suggest that somehow council tax has not been an issue for our viewers is to tell them something that they wouldn't agree with. And your forecasts already show that council tax is projected to increase in every single one of the next years of government spending that we know about. In fact, the forecast is that council tax is going to go up by more than £10 billion in the next 5 years.
And Conservative councils deliver better services with lower council tax than Labour ones.
Well, again, I'm sorry, I have to pick you up on that. The average Band D property tends to be higher in Labour councils, but the overall average council tax bill tends to be lower in Labour councils. These figures are always
you have
complex,
to always compare Band D properties for consistency.
And that's the way that
and you just confirmed there that
do
Conservative councils have lower council tax than Labour.
In Band D properties.
If you're comparing like with like, apples for apples.
The point our viewers, I want them to understand that it is a complicated picture when it comes to council tax. So when you make one bold claim, the situation is in fact more nuanced. But I want to come back to this fact about your message to the country, and you raised it there, about the message shifting somewhat in the last few days, not necessarily so much to say, let's win this, but to say you should worry about a big Labour majority to stop the other side romping home. And again, I want to show people one of the adverts that you've put out on social media, which actually suggests a massive Labour victory. This is Conservative Party material. And you seem now to be resorting to just trying to spook people into some kind of massive majority. Isn't that an admission of defeat when, as you said, not a single vote's been cast apart from a few postal votes?
No, it's not. It's simply doing what you led with before with me, which was to just point to the polls. So all we're saying is, if you look at the polls, and if people voted the way the polls are suggesting, that's what you'd get. And we're saying to people, is that what you want? And actually, I don't think it is what people want. And it's about saying to people, if you don't want a Labour government with a large majority and you voted Conservative in the past, that you need to vote Conservative. And if you vote for anybody else other than a Conservative candidate, you're going to get a Labour government with a large majority. But we're still fighting for every vote. We're just saying to people, if the polls were true, and if that's what people do when it comes to polling day, that's what you're going to get. That's kind of what you pitched to me at the beginning. But the whole point of being here and making this argument to you is we're trying to change people's minds. And we know, actually, one of the things I think John Curtis has said before is there's a record number of people at this stage of an election campaign who haven't made up their minds. I think something like 44% of voters are still to finally decide who they're going to vote for.
But isn't that exactly
the point? And it depends what they do about the outcome.
Isn't that exactly the point? There are still millions of people in this country, probably many of them watching this morning, who haven't decided what to do yet. And what they're hearing from you is not, hey, here's our positive vision. What they're hearing is, oh, well, you can't give the other side everything they want, so stick with us. And I know you're an experienced politician. You're a politician who likes to see themselves as somebody who's honest and candid. Isn't that something that sounds a bit desperate?
Not really. Look, the whole conversation, often with broadcasters, is all framed around the polls. I completely agree with what you just said there latterly. A lot of people haven't made their minds up. They're still thinking about what they want to do. And I've said we've set out a clear manifesto. In our case, a programme for government, properly costed, lots of detail about what we want to do across a whole range of policies. And this morning, Wes Streeting on your programme and on others has confirmed that their manifesto is actually a document to get them through the election campaign, which is what we've been saying to people. There's a lot of spending commitments they've made, which they're not being straightforward about. They're not being clear about how they're going to pay for it. They're desperate to spend more of other people's money.
Well, you've also put forward a lot of spending commitments and have said that you can pay for them all based on tax avoidance. So we talked about that a lot last week.
And welfare reform, and we've set out, Mel Stride's already set out very specific plans about how we're going to do that.
And we talked to him a lot about that.
Costed.
And we talked to him a lot about that last week, including also many independent experts pointing out that those kinds of savings are often very, very hard to achieve. But I want to ask you about the party to the right of you, Nigel Farage's Reform UK. Now, in one poll, only one poll, but in one poll they surpassed you. In others, they've been shown to be closing the gap. But you started this campaign trying to please some of the voters who might be attracted to reform with plans for national service, plans to protect people's pensions. And they're beating you at your own game.
No, look, again, it comes down to what people do in the end. So, look, people that are attracted to reform, looking at what they say they're interested in, they want lower taxes and they want to deal with migration. But there are only two people that are going to be Prime Minister at the end of this election, Rishi Sunak or Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer's not going to cut taxes, he's going to put them up, and he's not going to cut migration, he's going to put it up. He's opposed every single one of the measures that we've put forward to deal with illegal migration.
But isn't the point about this actually that some of those voters think that you have failed on those areas, and some of your colleagues also point to frustration? Robert Jenrick, former immigration minister, friend of Rishi Sunak, not one of his regular critics, has written in the Telegraph this morning, people are going to reform because the tax burden is too high, the criminal justice system is too soft, and public services are too inefficient. And you have been in charge for 14 years.
So let me pick up on the migration point, because that was one of the stronger points. So look, two things. On illegal migration, we've reduced the number of people coming here illegally by a third over the last year. At a time, that number was going up in Europe. Now, there's more to do on that. We have got a plan. The Rwanda plan is ready to go straight after the election. There's a clear choice there. Labour said they wouldn't even do it if it was working. It's taken time to get it through Parliament. It's a clear deterrent there to stop those organised trafficking gangs moving people across the channel. On legal migration, which we've said is too high, the Prime Minister's not talking about what he's doing in the future. He's already taken decisions to reduce it by a half this coming year. We've already seen it reducing by a quarter.
Isn't it too late, Mark Harper? You have here somebody who was in the cabinet relatively recently, a friend of Rishi Sunak, Robert Jenrick, writing in a newspaper during an election campaign that your party's record on things that are really important to voters, on crime, on public services, on immigration, he's writing that record is not good enough, and he shares the frustration of your natural voters. It's too late, isn't it?
Well, look, no, I don't think it is. I think the elections are about choices and they're about the future. Yes, our record is important. I think in many areas our record is very impressive, like on schools, for example. 90% of schools are good or outstanding. Primary school children are the best readers in the world. That's enormously important for the opportunities for young people going forward. But elections are about the future and they're about choices. And they're about whether you want to cut taxes. Our manifesto has a clear costed plan to do that. Labour's is about raising taxes. Ours is about cutting migration, legal and illegal. A clear plan to do so. Labour's is not. That's a very clear choice for people. And those reform voters who want lower taxes and lower migration have to think, is that more likely to happen under the Conservatives or under the Labour Party? There's a very clear answer there. We're the only party likely to deliver that with a clear plan to do so.
There's a lot of pressure on the primary school children of England because Conservative ministers keep boasting about their record of helping them get better at reading. So I hope if any of them are watching, they're not feeling that political pressure from top because they keep being mentioned. I want to talk to you about something specific in your current job as Transport Secretary. Now, high-speed rail was designated as a transport project for England and Wales. even though the track didn't go through Wales, but it was calculated that the Welsh population would get some benefit of it. The Plaid Cymru leader, Iorwerth, who's joining us later, he says that even though the project has been cancelled, it's not fair that the money from the cancellation is all being spent in England, and he says that Wales is owed £4 billion. Will he get it?
Well, it was an England and Wales project, but I don't agree with his characterisation, because actually Wales is getting it. In our plan that we've set out, we've made a clear commitment to spend of that £36 billion, which is all being reinvested in transport. Some of it is being spent, as Andy will know, on Northern Powerhouse Rail, and we've made commitments about that. But £1 billion is going to be spent in North Wales on electrifying the North Wales main line, something we've committed to, which Labour hasn't. That's going to be a huge game changer for the economy in North Wales.
But will they get that £4 billion is what they believe they're owed?
Yeah, but we don't agree with that.
So
it was an England and Wales project, but there's a big chunk of money from those savings from cancelling the second phase of HS2, which is absolutely being spent in Wales, and the Welsh population will get the benefit of it, and that's a clear commitment only from the Conservatives.
OK, Mark, it's always good to have you with us in the studio. I just wonder, some of our viewers, and I think some of your colleagues have been wondering a bit if during the campaign people are going to see more of some of the other very well-known cabinet ministers on the campaign trail or doing interviews. I know you, I think, have done 10 what we call media rounds during the campaign. We've seen a lot of your colleague Mel Stride. I mean, do you like doing interviews, or some of your colleagues coming to give you a bit more of a hand in the final weeks of the campaign?
I quite like doing. Look, I'm happy to do whatever I'm asked to do by the centre. Look, I enjoy doing these interviews. I enjoy the opportunity to go out and explain to people what we're offering the country, why they should vote Conservative, the choice to get lower taxes, deal with migration, and have a more optimistic and positive future. And I think that is a very clear offer, and I hope people take that choice on the 4th of July. OK, well, Mark, it's always good to have you with us. As I said, thanks very much for coming in today during this very, very busy time. Anyone would think there's an election on. Let's see what our panel have to say about all of that. We talked about social care, we talked a bit about Nigel Farage, we talked about all sorts of things. Let's first of all go to you, Andy. What did you think of what Wes Streeting had to say about social care? Because it's a long-term promise, so if we win, we'll do something in 10 years' time.
Well, I was encouraged, as I said at the start. I heard positivity from Wes, and quite a lot of scaremongering in the last interview. I think your interviews brought out the character of this election. I heard from Wes a national care service within a 10-year period, which sounds pretty encouraging to me. But also an immediate
if they win this time,
pay rise.
If they're then lucky enough to win the next time.
An immediate pay rise for carers. I just think the situation they're going into is really, really challenging. And this is the flaw. I respect Mark, and he's a good communicator, but this is the flaw in what he was saying. If you want, I think I heard him say, if you want lower taxes and lower migration, the obvious choice of the Conservatives, we've got the highest tax burden in living memory under them and the highest net migration. So I'm afraid his argument completely falls apart. But because of that, obviously it's a difficult inheritance for the Labour Party. The thing that resonated though was what Ian said, and I'm just going to give you a personal view. Personally, I believe in the end, the only answer is to provide social care on NHS terms and to ask for a contribution from people that is, proportionate to their assets. And
can I ask what your personal experience, you've referenced it a couple of times?
Yeah, it's hard to talk about in some ways, but my dad's been going through a situation where we've seen the system at close hand, and by the way, he's in a situation now which is wonderful actually. But we've seen the other side of things as well, not the people. The people are brilliant, and Wes said this. If anyone calls social care unskilled, well, I'm sorry, I'm going to challenge that as well. I mean, the people who did come in to support in the home, fantastic. It's the system and this thing that if anything's slightly wrong, you have to ring 999. Or the idea that a 15-minute visit gets somebody from their bed to an armchair, well, no, I'm sorry, that isn't going to work as easy as people say. So, yeah, this really has to change. But obviously, I put forward a bigger plan. In the end, you've got to see this as one system where people are supported from home to hospital and back again as quickly as possible.
And Dean, do you think, you were a health minister among some of the jobs that you've done, do you think that the parties are still ducking social care?
Yeah, I was quite frustrated listening to both Mark and Wes, to be frank, because Wes spoke about, wanting to sit down again, and we have the Dilnot review, which was a huge body of work, and it was actually ready to launch in the September after Boris Johnson was removed. It was ready to go. It would have cost £1.1 billion, 22 to 23, £2 billion, 23 to 24. It was then. It was the first thing Rishi Sunak cancelled when he became Prime Minister, which was desperately frustrating, because like Andy, I also have, with an 88-year-old mother, experience myself at the moment, and it's one of the most important services and one of the most neglected within the whole health sphere of delivery.
And no one's got the moral high ground, Nadine, have they?
Well, actually,
Neither
Boris
party.
Johnson did. He said, I'm ready to go. He took on the Dilnot review, said, I'm ready to go. It's ready to launch in September.
George Osborne and David Cameron also nearly did it and then didn't back in the day.
The one thing we should say is there should be just no point scoring on this issue anymore. Both sides have failed on it.
Wes was right on that. It's really the parties need to come together and decide what is it we're going to do, because this is not, it's not just Labour Party voters or Conservative Party voters who need social care.
And no one should lose their home.
People are getting older. People are living a lot longer, and that is not being taken care of. My main problem, my main thing is that there's still the demon that we don't talk about, which is Brexit, and why we are so broke. And I've just got some figures here which somebody sent me, which I'm very grateful for. Brexit is costing the UK economy $1 billion a year, $100 billion a year. The OBR said, that's Bloomberg Economics, OBR said 4% reduction in economic productivity because of leaving the EU. Analysis by Goldman Sachs found that Brexit is directly responsible for the UK economy growing 5% less since the vote in 2016.
Because of the loss of their bonuses.
Well, and what happened with the pandemic and what happened also with the war in Ukraine makes it very difficult to pull out actual strong conclusions, and economists argue about the effect. But Brian, you're frustrated it's not been mentioned in the campaign. I mean, what would you like to hear politicians saying?
In sense of what?
Well, on Brexit, so you're obviously frustrated
I just feel that we talk about lack of cash, we talk about lack of money, but when we realised, when I didn't realise that real wages are expected to fall by 1.8%, a loss of £470 per worker a year, and it seems to me that we are still suffering from that, and we've not done anything about it.
Well, it'll be interesting.
And so when we talk about other things, we can't really talk in terms of where we are, because we are suffering from Brexit.
Well, we'll talk in a bit later about the SNP, which you have backed over time. They haven't launched their manifesto yet, and some of the smaller parties do want to go back into the single market, and that's been a feature of some of the manifesto launches this week. We've been watching what's been happening very carefully this week. We've been watching all the events so that you don't have to watch every single thing. So it's time to ask, who won the week? Rishi Sunak was back in the crowds at Trooping the Colour yesterday, but the Tories' firm target whenever they're near a microphone, we've heard it this morning, is Labour's plans for tax. The Tories are going harder and harder in that direction, trying to force the Labour onto that territory and to rule out more and more tax rises. But this is what Keir Starmer always says.
Across the board for income tax, for national insurance and for VAT, there will be no increases.
But the Greens, the Lib Dems and the SNP all say that the wealthiest should cough up more. There's John Swinney, the First Minister, proudly in his kilt at the football yesterday. Probably the less we mention that, the better. And the moment of the week was not the Scotland match, but perhaps Nigel Farage politically revelling, as one poll suggested his outfit reform was ahead of the Conservatives. Remember, the other polls do not show that, but they do show reform catching up. Nadine, how do you think your Conservative colleagues should handle Nigel Farage?
Gosh, how could anybody handle Nigel Farage?
Well, I don't know.
So what really interests me, to be frank, is the differences between what Nigel Farage is asking for and saying he wants to do, and the differences between what the Conservative Party principles are. You couldn't put a credit card between them. The only difference, I think, is that Nigel Farage is openly campaigning to leave the ECHR, which we aren't. But what happened, Laura, I think it's a fascinating study in what happens in politics. There became a vacuum And David Cameron and Boris Johnson always had their eye to the right. They were always aware that this day could arrive. And they always kept an eye to the right and embraced policies on both sides of the political spectrum in order to keep the right at bay. The minute Boris went, a vacuum was created, and Nigel Farage has stepped in and he's filled it.
Rishi Sunak's carried on with the Rwanda plan, and actually the government's rhetoric on immigration, some of the immigration rule changes in the last couple of months have been significant.
The backdrop of everything else that was going on within the Conservative Party, the infighting, Brexit. You know, since 2016, since the EU referendum, the Conservative Party has just been beset by turmoil and problems, and removing 2 sitting prime ministers really didn't help with any of that.
Brian, the SNP manifesto launches next week. You're a backer of independence. Do you look forward to their manifesto, or are you excited about it?
I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. I mean, there could be, as the Plaid Cymru have done, they could be backing away from the notion of independence.
Do you think they have backed off?
They have backed off. Well, I don't know if Scottish backed off, but I think that it's something that worries me, because I still believe in independence. But I don't actually. It's it's very difficult, because I'm not really. I mean, I do believe in independence, but I don't believe that we shouldn't be part of these islands. I do believe we need a new kind of system. I don't believe in a united kingdom. I believe that we should have a sort of united federation of these islands. That each country should be independent, but come together and to support the whole, instead of things being dictated, as we find in Scotland, on our behalf, that we have very little say in. The fact is, we voted 62% to stay in Europe, and we lost out completely, so we had no voice there.
Also, talking of that, just briefly, if you can, Andy, which is a silly thing to say to a politician, but briefly, if you can, I just wonder if Labour wins, what you, as one of the very powerful elected mayors around the country, you know, in just that sense, you're talking about the SNP wanting more of a voice, Scotland wanting more of a voice, according to them. What would you hope for from the next government, whoever it is, in terms of the mayors? I mean, do you want more power?
Money. That's what you want to say, Andy. Andy always wants more money.
But they've promised the Council of the Nations and Regions, so straight away there's a role for elected mayors in the running of the country. I tend to agree, not completely with Brian, because I do believe in the UK, but I think we need to rewire the political system completely. Yeah. I think this election could actually make the case for PR. Now, I don't agree with Farage on barely anything. He says he's in tune with the British people. He wants to get rid of the NHS, and one of his candidates said that we should have been neutral about Nazi Germany. Well, no, I'm sorry, that's not in tune with the British people. However, we could see something like 2015 here, which is lots of votes for a party, but not many seats. And I don't think, you know, you've got to put party advantage aside. That's not a healthy thing in a democracy. Okay. So I do agree we need more devolution right across England. Labour is promising that. We need a bigger role. Greater Manchester is growing faster than the UK economy, and we have been doing for a number of years. Okay. That is how Labour gets the growth.
Andy, a lot of that is due to the investment that you've been given by the Conservative government, who have invested in levelling up in your region and your area. I did it when I was Secretary of State. I gave you money.
I praise them at times.
Right. So. I know that you lot are such shrinking violets. I'm going to call a halt to this bit of our conversation. We'll be back with you towards the end of the programme. But actually, Brian, you're putting your hand up. I have to give you a shot as you politely put your hand up.
I worry about the Conservatives. I really do worry about the Conservatives, because I think
we're not going to be a strong enough opposition.
Well, yes, exactly. But I also think that Nigel Farage is not doing any good at all. I mean, he's really ruining that party. And if I was a Conservative voter, I would really be worried about what's happening to my party.
Well, there you go.
You know, I'm not a Conservative, and I never will be a Conservative voter. I'd just like to state that first and foremost. But I do worry about his influence. And I find him slightly fascist, quite frankly.
Can I confirm I don't worry about the Conservative Party?
He's not here. Nigel Farage was here. Nigel Farage was here with us last week. He's not here to defend himself from anything this week, but we did speak to him last week. All three of you, my shrinking violets this morning, enough of you for now. You all know, as we've been talking, this election is about much more than just the big red and blue teams. The Yellows, the Lib Dems, have been gaining some ground, hoping to grab Tory seats. The Lib Dems have promised free personal care for the elderly, more GPs and rejoining the EU's single market. But its leader, Ed Davey's photo ops, they're what's really been getting attention.
Oh, there we go.
Welcome, Sir Ed. It's always good to have you with us on the programme. Now, you certainly look like you've been having a great time, but without being too po-faced, some of our viewers have got in touch with us to say they think it looks a bit daft and it looks even a bit objectionable. And one of those is Lee Castleton, who is a sub-postmaster. We've had a question from him for you before. He lost his livelihood in the Horizon scandal. You answered his question then, but he has told us that he thinks that your stunts aren't the kind of thing that you should be doing. And we can have a listen to what Lee has to say just now.
I don't particularly like the buffoonery. I find it very Boris-esque, and I don't think there's any need for it. It's really, really, really important that we trust him. And trust is never going to be built by swinging around on ropes or paddleboarding in Cumbria. Trust is about engaging with the people that need that engagement.
Do you think you're really taking it seriously?
Well, on Sub-Postmaster, my heart goes out to Lee and all the others who were so badly affected, and I'm looking forward to giving evidence to the inquiry, which I campaigned for to hold people to account. But in terms of the things we've been doing, the stunts, actually the real issue is engaging people, and they have done. And one of the reasons I'm so pleased to be on your programme is to talk about what Liberal Democrats are standing for. We're still standing for health and care. We put that at the centre of our manifesto. We're talking about the cost of living, and that's not coming up enough. People are really struggling out there, and we're talking about the environment. We're the ones campaigning against the sewage scandal, for example, and I'm determined in all the seats that we can win across the blue wall against many Conservatives in the West Country and so many other places. People hear about what the Liberal Democrats stand for from our local champions, because we could make real gains at this election. And we will talk about those policies, and you've already actually had Wes Streeting say your ideas on social care are good ones, and we will come to that. But isn't there a risk, though? We heard it from Lee Castleton. We have had emails from some other viewers about this, that people watch what you're doing and they think you're not really taking this seriously, and perhaps you're not taking them seriously. Well, we're taking the voters' concerns really seriously. That's why we've been putting forward all these policy proposals. And whenever we do one of those stunts to engage people, so I show that I'm not taking myself too seriously, I'm taking the voters seriously, we've had lots of policy ideas. So when I was coming down that slide, we were talking about mental health. But while you were on the slide? Well, actually, the BBC were covering our policy as I came down. And I was pleased that they did, because it's really important. We've got a crisis, the mental health of our young people. We've got hundreds of thousands of young people waiting for therapies, waiting for counselling, waiting for support. And what we've said is, let's make sure there's a qualified mental health professional in every primary school, in every secondary school. Let's fund that by asking the social media giants to pay more in digital services tax. And so we've come forward with a very, very significant policy. And when I had the baker's hat on, I was baking biscuits with school kids, but we were talking about free school meals. And one of the policies in your manifesto is to have an office for whistleblowers, to have much more protection for people who call out bad bosses or bad practices in their workplace or wherever else. And you say there it's very important. But Lee Castleton, who was one of those sub-postmasters, and you were a post office minister at a time when some of the Horizon scandal was unfolding, he wants to know, how can we trust anyone with your record on the post office scandal to do the right thing by whistleblowers in government? Well, because the whistleblower was key in the Horizon scandal. We really only heard it in the Panorama programme by BBC in 2015, quite a few years after I left office, and then in 2019 in the High Court case. And that whistleblower from Fujitsu, an insider in Fujitsu, who said actually the post office had been telling lies to sub-postmasters, to ministers, to courts and judges, that whistleblower was crucial, as the ITV drama on Alan Bates showed. But his question is, how could people trust you to protect whistleblowers when you were Post Office Minister, one of the people who was in charge of the system when concerns were already being raised? Now, I know you say you weren't told or you would have done something about it, but some of the campaigners feel that you didn't do enough, that you weren't listening. Well, I was listening. Actually, I was the first minister to meet Alan Bates, and I took his issues really seriously. The first minister to meet him, and I put his concerns to the Post Office, and I think I was probably the only minister who did that in that level of detail. And I was lied to, just like the sub-postmasters were lied to, just like the judges and the courts were lied to. And that's why the whistleblower is so important. We have to change the system Laura. We've seen it in the contaminated blood scandal. We've seen it in the Hillsborough scandal. You can't run a system if people are lied to. You need to find a way through that. So we've got several issues, actually. The whistleblower protection, and it's been Liberal Democrats leading on that. The duty of candour, to make sure that public servants have to tell the truth. And there's a whole range of things that I'd like to see changed. And when I give evidence to the inquiry, which I've campaigned for, because I want these people to be held to account, they've imposed the most awful misery on hundreds of people. When we have that inquiry, I'm looking forward to give evidence to it.
Let's talk about some of your other policies then. And you have very movingly made your experience of caring for your disabled son, John, part of your campaign to give more support to carers. And really, free adult social care was the centrepiece, really, of your manifesto, wasn't it? But you also served as a minister during the coalition government between 2010 and 2015. It made significant cuts to the support for people in those kinds of situations. Do you regret that now?
Well, actually, if you look back at that record, the Liberal Democrat record, with great Liberal Democrat ministers, we produced the Care Act of 2014. That came from the Dilnot Commission, and it would have meant that we'd have had proper care from 2015, 2016. What happened then? The Conservatives government alone reneged on their promises. Even though there had been a legislation in Parliament, which everyone had voted for, they broke that.
But while you were in government, the question I'm asking you is about what happened when you were in government, not what happened after. And when you were in government, real-term spending on social care fell. There's a lot of evidence that shows that people who have real difficulties in life struggled enormously as a result of the austerity that was enacted during that period when you were in government. Do you regret how far it went?
Well, it's true there were some difficult decisions. We fought the Conservatives every day. We managed to get through the Care Act when we were in government. And if that had gone on, 1 million more people would be getting care now. But the Conservatives didn't take that forward.
But I'm asking you about the decision to remove some funding from people who believe very strongly that they needed it. You were part of that government. Do you regret being part of those decisions?
I fought the Conservatives very hard, and here's the key.
You could have resigned if you were that upset about it. You could have said, I don't want any part of this. I'm just asking you a straightforward question. You've talked very movingly and I think very honestly about the situation that families where they have relatives who need care find themselves in. Many people really struggled with the outcomes of those decisions that were made by the coalition government. Do you regret being part of that?
Well, there were tough decisions, that's really clear. But what we were doing was planning for the future to get much more generous care. And the 2014 Care Act was at the heart of that. And Liberal Democrats championed that. I remember debating it in Cabinet and pushing that forward. And unfortunately, in 2015, we thought the Conservatives would continue that. And they didn't. And look what they did after we left office, and they were by themselves. The first budget of George Osborne, he cut the welfare spending in 1 year by £12 billion. Now, we had stopped that. We had fought them, and we'd stopped them cutting the welfare budget by that huge amount, which really caused huge problems. And we planned for the future. And I'm really proud that actually in our manifesto now, we're taking forward some of those plans, both because improving care is right in itself. It's hugely important to help the health service. I just don't believe you can sort out the health service and rescue it unless you sort out social care. And here's the other thing, which no one is talking about except the Liberal Democrats. And it's partly because of my personal experience. I was a young carer when my mum was terminally ill. Then when my grandmother, who looked after me after my mum died, I looked after her a bit. And then I have my disabled son. So I've got a whole lifetime of caring. And both my own experience and the experience of millions of people out there, millions of people, is that the family carers are critical. And what I want to say at this election is, if you don't support the family carers, as well as the care workers, you're not going to sort this out. And I am absolutely passionate we're going to do that. We've come forward with probably the most ambitious agenda on it. I'm really excited about it. And you know, because we've talked about it, we've had a really strong reaction from people who really think that we get it.
And to pay for it, you're proposing more than £26 billion of tax rises on big business. Are you not worried about the effect that that might have?
Well, let me take you through those. On the health and care plan, it's about £9 billion, and there are two big things that we're doing for that. Though, if we're basically taking the tax on banks back to what it was in 2016 under the Conservatives. The Conservatives have cut taxes on the big banks
But you think
massively.
those businesses can take it just for a short of time? You think the businesses won't be affected?
They took it in 2016, and the other bit, the capital gains tax, is going to be paid by the 0.1% of the population who basically the billionaires and multimillionaires, because at the moment they're paying a lower tax rate on their capital gains than the rest of us on our income. That's not fair.
Do you think you're now to the left of the Labour Party? You're going after Tory seats?
We're the Liberal Democrats, and I'm so proud of our manifesto. We think we can beat lots of Conservatives, some at SNP, and I think the more people look at our manifesto on health and care, on ending the sewage scandal, on the cost of living, the more they look at their local Liberal Democrat, they know they can get a local champion with a big, strong national voice. So I hope people back us on the 4th of July.
OK, we will see. Sir Ed, thanks for coming in. It's always good to have you with us in the studio. We didn't ask you to have a makeover or put on any silly outfits or anything.
I can come back.
So it's great to have you with us in the studio. Thanks very much for your time. Well, it is a busy old few weeks in politics. The leaders' debates in the last fortnight have given a chance to some of the smaller parties to show off their wares, including, of course, Iorwerth, the leader of Plaid Cymru. His party at the moment has 3 out of 40 Welsh Westminster seats, but in their manifesto, they're arguing for more public spending and bigger windfall taxes on the energy companies. Well, I'm pleased to say he's with us for the first time in the studio this morning. It's great to have you with us.
Good to be with you.
In 2021, you stood for a referendum on Welsh independence, but now you're only offering a consultation. So why have you backed off that?
Haven't backed off at all. I was listening to Brian Cox speaking earlier. It's right there on page 1 of our manifesto. You know, my firm belief that I've had all my life that Wales won't reach its potential until we have all those levers of change in our own hands. I believe it's in the hands of the people of Wales what the timescale is for that. But interestingly, listening to Brian Cox, he was talking, we clearly see the world in the same way. I believe in independence, but I'm not an isolationist in any way. I'm an internationalist, and I see Welsh independence as part of the redesigning of the UK, whereas independent nations then would work very, very closely together. But this isn't an independence election. This is about getting fair play for Wales in the here and now.
But if it's what you believe so strongly, though, why not have in your manifesto actually a demand for a referendum? Because a consultation, we hear it often from politicians in the studio on Sunday mornings, promising a consultation is promising, you know, some more chat and then maybe a commission, and then things take time. Why back off from your clear request, demand perhaps, for a referendum?
Yeah. Again, well, there is clearly a demand implicit for a referendum because we want to get to that point where we ask the people of Wales if they are ready to embrace this. The fascinating thing for me, as somebody who's believed this all my life, is the direction that we've been on in recent years, where now regularly 1/3 of people, 50% of the younger age group say yes to independence. But it's about getting more people curious in what it might mean and answering those questions about the challenges that we face. There was an independent commission recently, government appointed, on the constitutional future of Wales that said there are 3 viable options for us: more devolution, perhaps federalism. A bit difficult, I think, given the size of England. And the 3rd viable one is independence. So it's viable, we can do it. It's about getting people excited about what it is. And that, of course, means recognising what the challenges are too.
Do you think you'll see it in your lifetime?
There's no reason why not. It's as
that wasn't my question. So there's no reason why not. Do you think it will happen? Is a different question.
There's no reason why not, and it can. And it's up to the people of Wales. That's the key thing here. I don't believe that Wales's situation now is the best it could be. I don't think the UK's situation now is the best it could be. I think many people watching this morning, whether they're in Wales or elsewhere, think that something needs to happen in politics in these islands that leads in a different direction. One of the things that I think could be very valuable for everybody, wherever they are, is to have that redesign. But for now, in this election, it's about, in this UK context, making sure that Wales has that fairness that we deserve.
You've been arguing also that Wales is owed billions of pounds because of HS2 being cancelled. Now, your price tag for that is £4 billion. We asked Mark Harper, the Transport Secretary, if he was going to pony up the cash for Wales, and he said no. He said, no, that's not our calculations, you're wrong to ask for that money. What do you make of that?
But they gave it to Scotland, and they gave it to Northern Ireland. The way funding is meant to work is that, you know, if money is given to England, then there are consequentials to Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. This is a project that was designated an England and Wales project, even though there's not a centimetre of track in Wales. KPMG did a study that said it would be detrimental to the Welsh economy, yet we're paying for it. And as spending on HS2 goes up, spending available for rail in Wales actually goes down. I don't think that is a just situation. It needs to be addressed. And imagine what we could do with that £4 billion for connectivity in Wales.
One of the other things in your manifesto this week is you say you want to have net zero carbon emissions by 2035. Now, some of our viewers might think that sounds like a laudable goal, but 2035 is extremely stretching. Is that realistic?
I think we have to be setting the bar high, and for us in Wales in particular, given that we're energy rich, there's an economic element to this as well as policies and aspirations that allow us to reach our environmental obligations. Now, Labour in Wales agree with us that the Crown Estate should be devolved, so we can make the most of our natural resources. UK Labour say no, just as they say no to other elements that Labour in Wales agree with us on, the devolution of crime and justice, on post-EU funding. Labour in Wales are being dispowered by UK Labour. That's why we need that Plaid Cymru voice.
OK, well, Iorwerth, it's been great having you with us in the studio this morning. It's nice to have you join us on a Sunday morning. Thanks for coming in. Well, as promised, as you know, we do this every week during the campaign. We've been checking the politicians' facts. In fact, we do it every week of the year. For Labour, Wes Streeting claimed that Conservative policies would mean people's mortgages going up by £4,800. That figure is not reliable. It's based on a series of questionable assumptions about how much Tory policies would cost and how they'd fund them. And to boot, it's stretched over 5 years rather than being an annual figure. For the Tories, Mark Harper said they had reduced the number of people coming to the UK illegally by a third over the last year. It is true that the number of people arriving on small boats fell by a third in 2023. But over the last 12 months, the fall has been smaller than that. And importantly, so far this year, the number of arrivals is up, and it is higher than it has ever been. Now then, the general election is not the only big contest going on this month. England has its first Euros match tonight, and we've been wondering, what is it with politicians and football? Have a look at this. And yes, Andy Burnham, that was a somewhat younger Andy Burnham there in that montage. What is it about politicians and football? Because sometimes it's genuine, right? Keir Starmer is a proper, genuine football fan. There's no argument about that. But it's sometimes a bit cringeworthy, isn't it?
It is, yeah, of course it is. It's because it's obviously so popular and politicians try and gravitate towards things that are popular. From my point of view, you know, there's no posturing when you support Everton Football Club. This is a lifetime of hard work and fighting the unjust points deductions from the Premier League. But yeah, for me, it's kind of real. I'm an Everton season ticket holder, but I guess it's just, you know, it's because it's what brings the nation alight. And Rishi, I think, is going to regret the timing of this election. You know, every time now there's a knock on the door in a big match, everyone's going to bloody Rishi, and there's another vote gone.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, what effect the Euros might have on the election campaign? You know, there's big games coming up. Maybe this might be a quieter week in terms of the campaign.
Possibly, yeah. You know, Auntie and I, not a lot of people know this. We have a common bond since we were in Parliament together. My great-grandfather was one of the founders of Everton Football Club.
No!
And Auntie kept saying to me, 15 years ago, I'm going to bring you in a book where your great-grandfather
I've never did it, no,
I actually had to become culture secretary and visit Everton to get it, because he never had empty promises, Andy. Yeah. He never handed it over. But yeah, it is, Andy's right. It is, you either come from places like Andy and I do, where football is a religion, or you decide you're a politician who's got to try and fake this and love football when you don't. So it's split into two halves, really. Okay. Well, it is a game of two halves.
And Brian, I have to ask you, obviously Scotland had a night that was very regrettable and sad the other night. If Scotland get knocked out, will you support England if they stay in?
Oh, I think Gareth Southgate has done a great job. So I'm actually, you know, I'm really keen. I mean, it's the one thing that unifies us is football. You know, we all love the football, you know, and it's the great unifying factor. In fact, politics would be a lot easier if we just followed our football teams.
There we go. Well, maybe that's an idea for the future. And of course, I hope you'll all be watching on BBC One tonight. Of course, the first England match of the Euros. Let's have a final word from you, our most important viewers, of course. David in Doncaster has written in to say, how can anyone believe that with the current economic situation, tax cuts are possible or realistic? But William says 15 years to create a manifesto for the people, and Labour is still trying to come up with ideas. Sue said, oh, sorry, Sue, the waffle from each and every party about their manifestos is painful to listen to, but humour is paramount in this election. I think we've had some of that from my shrinking violets here at the panel. 3 weeks done, less than 3 weeks to go until the day when millions of us have the chance to grab a stubby pencil and cast your ballot. Voting has started, with postal ballots having started to land on some doormats around the country. So from now on, as each day dawns, the fight between the parties is only going to become more and more intense, because it matters so much. Thank you to all of my guests, and most of all, thank to you for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you next Sunday, same time, same place.
I am the night that